I had been at Silverstone Solutions for over a decade. A senior software engineer, one of the oldest in the room, but not by choice. It was just the way it worked. I was proud of what I'd built. Hell, I knew what I'd built. Silverstone's flagship software platform, the one handling millions of transactions a day, was my baby. It was clean, efficient, and it ran like clockwork. Or at least it always had up until now. Everyone at the company knew I could fix things. They came to me when the platform needed tweaking, or when some bug popped up in the system. They trusted me with the big stuff, the small stuff too. Problem solving was my bread and butter. I was a cornerstone of this place, or at least I felt like one. I'd earned the respect of my team, and maybe even some from my peers. But when it came to upper management, it felt like I was invisible. They always praised the engineers on the surface, the ones who gave flashy presentations and wore tailored suits to the board meetings, but they never seemed to care about the nuts and bolts. Gregory Hunt, the CEO, was the face of the company. He was always out there shaking hands and making deals, but it was clear he didn't know a single line of code, let alone the technical intricacies of the platform I'd spent the last 10 years perfecting. He was more concerned with the company's image than its stability. It was a job, a life I'd built. But there were cracks I was starting to see. Not in the code, I could fix that. In the way the company operated, how we were all pushed for more, for bigger profits, for bigger brands. And then, like a bad omen, they announced the new partnership with a high-profile investor. It was supposed to be a win for everyone, a way to put Silverstone on the map. But all I could feel was a knot in my stomach. I was about to be pulled into a pressure cooker, one that could break the whole system. The pressure to keep everything stable now skyrocketed. I knew it was coming. The late nights, the relentless need for perfection. But what I didn't know was how soon everything would fall apart. The night before the deal was supposed to be finalized, I was hunched over my desk, staring at lines of code, running checks, looking for the tiniest sign that something was about to go wrong. I was running on fumes, again, but I didn't care. I'd done this 100 times before. This time, though, something felt off. My gut was telling me to double-check everything, even the stuff I knew backward and forward. At first, the glitches were small, just flickers in the system here and there, a few things running slower than they should have. I brushed it off, just a few bugs. The platform had been stable for years. It wasn't going to give up on me now. But then the glitches kept coming. Little by little, they piled up. The performance reports didn't match the usual metrics. And that weird flickering warning light on the server dashboard caught my eye. It was just a flicker, nothing to panic about, right? I should have known better than to dismiss it. Before I could even finish my thought, the system crashed, and I knew. I knew this wasn't just a glitch anymore. The breach warning flashed across my screen like a slap to the face, red, bold, blinking, the kind of thing that stops your breath. Everything in me froze for a second, just a second. But it was enough to make the panic start to settle in. I jumped up, hit the emergency call on my team chat, and started scrambling. I wasn't going to wait for confirmation. I didn't have time for that. Everyone now, code red. We've got a breach. Full lockdown on sensitive data. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I fired up the internal security protocols, trying to block access to the system. My team, the ones who'd been working long shifts too, started pinging me back. Some of them were juniors, shaking with the weight of it all, but they were still asking questions. I could hear the panic in their voices. Ella, what do we do? What do we do? I couldn't answer them fast enough. The system was fighting back now, throwing errors at me faster than I could keep up with. I was the one in charge of this. My name was on this platform, on every line of code, and it was slipping through my fingers. I was in the trenches, alone. The pressure was suffocating. I couldn't let it collapse. Not on my watch. Not now, when everything was hanging by a thread. The company's future was riding on me keeping it together, and I wasn't going to fail. But I wasn't the only one who knew how high the stakes were. Gregory Hunt, the CEO, the man who'd only show up for the photo ops and board meetings, was nowhere to be found. Not even a peep from him or anyone in upper management. They were too busy polishing their press statements, getting ready for the media storm. It was business as usual for them. I couldn't even think about them right now. My job was to stop this disaster before it ruined everything. Ella, a voice came through my headset. It was John, one of the junior engineers. We've got another hole opening up. I need help with this code. It's too much for me to handle on my own. On it, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Just breathe. We're gonna fix this. But the truth was, I wasn't sure we could fix it in time. The breach wasn't some small issue. Someone was trying to break in. And if they got through, sensitive client data would be exposed. Millions of dollars would be on the line. I wasn't just trying to save the system. I was trying to save the company from the kind of disaster that would bury it. My team was burning out. I could hear it in their voices, in the clicking of their keyboards. The room felt smaller, hotter, as if we were trapped in a box with no way out. The clock was ticking down, and every second that passed felt like it was pulling us closer to the edge of something we couldn't control. I pushed through. We all pushed through. But the longer I worked, the more I realized how alone I was in this fight. My team was doing their best, but they didn't have the experience to catch all the cracks I saw. I was the one who knew the architecture, the layers of security, the weak spots no one else knew about. I was the one holding it together. And still, nobody upstairs even seemed to care. They were too busy with their shiny deal, too distracted by the image they were crafting. They didn't know what was happening below the surface. The moment we hit this crisis, I realized something important. They never would. I kept working, fixing, patching, tweaking code in a fevered rush. But as I did, the weight of it started to sink in. If I couldn't hold this together, Silverstone was done. Not just this deal. The company's whole future was on the line, and it might only take one mistake to destroy everything I'd built. I wasn't going to let that happen. But no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was fighting a battle that had already been lost. It felt like we'd been working for days without a single break. But the system was stable, for now. The immediate threat was slowed, but the system was still fragile. One wrong move and it could all collapse. Not by a long shot. I'd spent hours patching holes, rerouting data, applying last-minute fixes to keep the system upright. My fingers were raw from typing, my eyes stinging from the constant screen glare. I could barely keep my head up, but the adrenaline and the pressure kept me moving. The job wasn't done, but the immediate disaster had passed. For now, at least. Then Gregory Hunt walked in. He didn't even knock, just barged in like he owned the place. I barely looked up as he stormed across the room, his polished shoes clicking against the tile. He didn't look like someone who had been up all night, fighting the same battle I had. His face was still shiny, well-rested, like he'd just stepped out of a board meeting or a PR event. I knew what was coming the second he walked through that door. "Ella," he snapped, his voice sharp and impatient. "What is this?" He waved his hand at the screen, dismissing everything I'd just spent hours fixing. "This system's a mess. It's not future-proofed against the kind of attack we just faced. Why wasn't it prepared for something like this? Why isn't it ready for what's coming next?" My jaw tightened. I didn't have the energy to argue with him, but I still had to hold my ground. "Gregory, the system's secure now. We're stabilized. The breach was contained." "No, it's not," he cut me off, his eyes scanning the monitors like he understood any of it. "You're talking about patching up old systems. This is why we're behind. You're not thinking big enough. The company's been held back for years by outdated infrastructure." I felt a cold wave wash over me. He was talking about me. He always had. Gregory had never liked how I approached things. Too cautious, too calculated. He wanted flashy, fast solutions that looked good on paper, not the kind of stability that actually kept the company running. But I was tired, so tired, of hearing him spout off his corporate buzzwords without understanding the systems he was criticizing. But this was something else. I knew what was coming before he even said it. "You're just not a good fit for the company anymore," he said, almost as if it was nothing. His words cut through the room like a blade. "You're holding us back. We need to modernize, move forward. You're not the direction we're heading." My blood went cold. I wanted to scream, to tell him that I was the one who'd kept this place running for the last decade. That I was the one who fixed things when everyone else just looked the other way. But the words were stuck in my throat. They felt like they would burn if I said them out loud. In front of my team, in front of people I'd worked side by side with for years. My credentials were gone in an instant, wiped from the system with a few keystrokes. The validation I'd spent my career building, my reputation, evaporated in a heartbeat. And in its place was this hollow, gaping pit of humiliation. "Gather your things," Gregory said, voice flat, indifferent. "You're done." I couldn't even speak. I could barely breathe. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my things. My badge deactivated as I swiped it at the door. The light blinked red. No entry. I'd been locked out. The room was silent, a weight heavier than any code I'd ever written hanging over us. The team was still staring at me, frozen in disbelief. They didn't know what to do, how to react. Some of them looked embarrassed for me. Some seemed confused. None of them said a word. It felt like the floor was shifting under me, but there was no time to process any of it. The reality of what had just happened hit me like a punch in the gut. In one instant, everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, was gone. Like I was just a tool, outdated and replaced. I stood there, staring at the door, feeling the weight of it all. The years of hard work, the sleepless nights, the missed family dinners, all of it, reduced to nothing. And then I walked out of that building, past the cold, sterile lobby I had seen 1,000 times before, past the desks, the familiar faces. But it all felt different, like I was a ghost in my own life. The door closed behind me with a finality that sounded louder than it had any right to. The chill of the night air hit me as I stepped outside. I glanced back at the building one last time, but I couldn't bring myself to care. The weight of the dismissal was still on my chest, but there was nothing left to hold on to. I wasn't sure where I was going or what I was supposed to do now. I was just gone. I had barely been outside an hour before the headlines started popping up. I hadn't even gotten to the subway when my phone buzzed. My inbox flooded with messages, some from numbers I didn't recognize. My name, Ella Hayes, was everywhere, everywhere. The first article I saw was from a tech blog. Silverstone system collapse. Was engineer Ella Hayes to blame? The words jumped off the screen, like they were accusing me of something I hadn't done. It was the same story everywhere. Breach, failure, incompetence. All these sharp words tossed at me like knives. The insinuation that I was somehow involved in the mess, that I had failed to keep the company's system secure, I, who had worked countless hours keeping the damn thing afloat, was now painted as the villain. I couldn't stop scrolling. I hated myself for doing it, but I couldn't look away. Each article, each new headline made my stomach twist. They didn't know the half of it. Hell, they didn't know anything. But it didn't matter. The story had already been written, and in that moment, I was the scapegoat. I was the one who had been let go, the one who had failed, the one who didn't fit anymore. No mention of Gregory, of the leadership that had failed to see the cracks. No mention of the pressure I had been under, fighting alone to hold the whole thing together. No one from my team reached out. No one from HR, not even a simple, "We're sorry this happened" message. The silence was suffocating. I'd been part of that company for over 10 years, and just like that, I was invisible. My colleagues, who I had trusted, who I had helped, were silent. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was a message from John. John. I hadn't seen him in months. He had been one of the junior engineers I'd mentored. Always eager, always asking questions, learning. A kid who had looked up to me. I hadn't expected anything from him. Certainly not after what happened. But the message was short, just a few lines. "Ella, I just wanted to say I'm really sorry for what happened. We know the truth. We trust you." The words hit me harder than I expected. They were simple, but they meant something. They meant that, at least for one person, I wasn't just the villain in the story the press was writing. Someone knew. Someone remembered the work I had done, the years I had spent fixing what needed to be fixed, the sacrifices I'd made to keep everything running smoothly. I sat down on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone. My coffee had gone cold next to me, forgotten. There was a heaviness in my chest. Anger, grief, frustration, all tangled up in a way I couldn't shake. I was angry at the company, at the way they'd treated me, at how easily they discarded me. But I was angriest at the way the media and my coworkers had turned on me without a second thought. Not even a simple check-in. Not even a, "Hey, are you okay?" But John's message. It made something shift. Not enough to undo everything, but enough to remind me that not everyone had forgotten. Not everyone had bought the story they were selling. I pulled my knees up to my chest and rested my forehead against them. I wanted to disappear. The weight of it all felt too much. The betrayal, the humiliation, the lies. But then I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A flicker of something stronger than just anger. I was done letting them tell my story. The more I watched Silverstone sink, the more I realized they weren't going to get out of this, not without me. But what could I do? I was on the outside now, shut out completely. The press spun their version of the story, but it was a different reality behind the scenes. The first week after the breach, Gregory Hunt was all over the news, claiming the company was on the mend, that security enhancements would be rolled out soon. He gave speeches like everything was fine, like they weren't on the verge of losing everything. The guy was a master at looking confident when everything was crashing around him. But I could see it. The panic behind those carefully crafted smiles. While Gregory held his press conferences, the situation at Silverstone was deteriorating fast. The system was still unstable. New breaches started cropping up, little cracks here and there that turned into massive vulnerabilities. The investors, who'd been so eager to sign on for the partnership, were starting to pull their funding. They could smell failure, and they weren't about to throw their money into a sinking ship. I knew those servers, those protocols, inside and out. These guys were guessing, trying to patch things up without a real understanding of what was wrong. Investors were nervous, pulling out in droves, and with each pull, the weight of the company's reputation plummeted further. It was chaos. And as the pressure mounted, I could feel Gregory's desperation from here. He was throwing people under the bus, blaming anyone he could, his team, the consultants, even the press. But the truth was, he couldn't fix it. He couldn't fix what I had built, what I had protected. And now he was running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to salvage something that was already lost. I could almost hear the anger in his voice through the phone calls he was making. The sharp edge of his words, trying to keep his team in line, trying to keep up appearances. But it was becoming clear even to the people around him, people who had once backed him blindly, that Gregory Hunt was in over his head. His closest allies started looking at him sideways, not sure if he was just lying or if he genuinely didn't know how to stop the bleeding. I couldn't help but feel a bitter sense of satisfaction, even as I watched Silverstone burn. All those years I'd spent working my ass off for this place, all those hours they'd taken from me, and for what? To be discarded like a broken tool? But the satisfaction didn't last long. I wasn't blind to what was happening. Silverstone's collapse would hurt a lot of people, some of them good people who had no idea what kind of mess they were in. And it was hard not to feel for them, even with everything I'd been through. My former colleagues, my team, were still in the thick of it. They were being dragged into this, stuck trying to fix a system that no longer worked. I tried not to think about them, but every time I saw another update, another failure from the company, I couldn't help but wonder what they were going through. And I hated myself for not being there, for not being able to fix it for them. It wasn't just the system that was broken. The trust was gone. The illusion of the company being some kind of tech giant, invincible and secure, was shattered. The real story, how a company that depended on its infrastructure had ignored the very people who kept it running, was finally starting to take shape. But it was too late for any of that to matter. The damage was done. Silverstone had made its bed. Now it was time to lie in it. The day it all broke, I almost felt like I'd been waiting for it. For weeks now, Silverstone had been on the edge, teetering, and I knew it wouldn't take much for the whole thing to come crashing down. But I couldn't have predicted this. No one could. It started with a simple failure, an alert that came through about a process that had triggered unexpectedly. Nothing new, right? Just another glitch. But when I looked deeper, I saw what it really was. The very security system I'd put in place years ago, the one designed to protect the company's most sensitive data, had locked everything out. A deep-level lockout. No one could access the system. Not Gregory, not the consultants, Not anyone, my system. I'd set it up this way for a reason, a last line of defense in case something went wrong, a fail-safe. But now I was gone, and no one else knew how to unlock it. Not even Gregory, the great CEO, could break through it, not without my authorization. I imagined the look on his face when the realization hit him. He was probably standing there, furious, with no idea what to do next. I could see it in my mind. Gregory pacing around, barking at his team, demanding answers they didn't have. Why can't we access the data, he'd be asking, voice rising with each word. Why is everything frozen? I need this fixed now, but no one could fix it. They had no idea how deep the security went. And then I thought about the investors, watching from the sidelines, pulling back slowly but surely. They weren't stupid. They could see what was happening. The company was losing control, and they weren't about to lose their money with it. As soon as the news hit that Silverstone's assets were locked in a vault no one could open, the investors started turning their backs. One by one. Gregory didn't have a solution. No one did. The phone calls started coming in. First, it was the insurance company. They'd been trying to activate their claim, trying to salvage something, anything. But of course, the system was locked. Protocols I'd put in place years ago meant they couldn't do anything without my signature. And I wasn't there. No one had a clue how to move forward without me. I could almost hear Gregory's voice crack through the phone as he talked to the insurance reps. We need that claim processed. Now, what do you mean you can't do it without her? It wasn't even my fault. And yet, I was the one who held the keys to their fate. Funny how that worked out. I could almost taste the panic rising in him as the minutes dragged on. Every phone call that went unanswered, every failed attempt to get through the lockout, made the walls close in a little more. Gregory's desperation was impossible to ignore now. The cracks were so obvious. Even his board members could see them. And they weren't looking at him the same way anymore. I couldn't help but feel a little satisfaction at that. But it didn't last long. This wasn't just some petty revenge. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about a company, the company I'd helped build, tearing itself apart. And the worst part, it was happening because they'd fired me. They thought they could just replace me and keep everything running smoothly. Well, now they were realizing they couldn't. I could almost hear the shift in the room as Gregory started pointing fingers, blaming the team, blaming the consultants, blaming the investors. Everyone but himself. The blame was slipping through his hands like sand. And with every second, Silverstone got closer to complete collapse. The entire company was locked out of its own system, and there was no easy fix in sight. And still, no one could do anything. It was too late. The damage had been done. And I was watching it unfold from the outside, knowing I could have stopped it. If only I'd been there. By the time the board finally realized what had happened, it was already too late. The cracks in Silverstone's shiny exterior were impossible to ignore now. The system was still locked out. Investors were pulling out faster than a sinking ship could take on water, and the media was having a field day. I kept up with the news, though it made me sick to my stomach. Articles about the failed security system and the catastrophic fallout were everywhere. But the most telling were the ones that questioned Gregory's leadership. Articles that pointed the finger squarely at him for firing me. The public wasn't stupid. They could see the truth behind the press conferences and empty promises. I couldn't help but feel a surge of vindication, but it was hollow. I wasn't celebrating. I was watching the company I'd poured everything into unravel, and I couldn't do a damn thing to fix it now. It wasn't just the press anymore. The SEC had gotten involved. They flagged Silverstone for not maintaining proper cybersecurity protocols, which was exactly what I'd been telling them for years. They had ignored my warnings. All of them, Gregory, the board, everyone, had brushed off the technical side of things, choosing to focus on shiny headlines and quarterly earnings. The worst part was seeing how people who had once supported Gregory began to pull back. The CFO, who had always backed him, was now questioning his decision to fire me. I could imagine the conversations in those boardrooms. He was probably asking himself what the hell had happened, why they'd let Gregory make the call to get rid of the one person who could have kept the company from imploding. I had been the backbone of the company's tech infrastructure. Without me, it was like trying to run a car without an engine. As the stock price plummeted and the investors started distancing themselves publicly, the truth was impossible to hide. Gregory had underestimated the importance of technical expertise, and now it was clear to everyone, investors, the media, even the people who had been closest to him, that his leadership had led them straight into a disaster, and he couldn't backpedal fast enough. Every word he spoke, every statement he issued, seemed to make things worse. He tried to paint the crisis as a temporary setback, but the investors weren't buying it. They didn't care about his promises anymore. The damage was done. I saw the footage of him at a press conference, trying to sound confident. His words about security improvements sounded more hollow by the minute. The way he was spinning it made me sick. How could he stand there, acting like nothing had happened? How could he pretend that firing me wasn't the thing that started this whole spiral? He didn't have the answers. I had the answers. But I wasn't there. And the company was paying for that mistake. Back at the boardroom, the mood had shifted. I imagined the tension in that room, the fear as they realized that Gregory wasn't the answer anymore. He was the problem. But it was too late to get rid of him. They were stuck with him, just like they were stuck with the mess he had created. And then the worst part hit me. The investors weren't just pulling out, they were publicly distancing themselves, calling out the company's failures in official statements. They weren't hiding behind polite language anymore. They were naming names. The stock kept tanking. Silverstone's reputation, built on years of innovation and success, was crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. The company that had been a giant was now a shell of its former self, and I could only watch from the outside, a bystander to the disaster that had unfolded because of one man's decisions. But still, no one reached out. No one called to ask for my help, even as everything burned. The company I had bled for, the one I had given years of my life to, was now a public mess, and I was nowhere near it. No one from the inside cared enough to ask me how to fix it. They didn't want my help. They wanted to pretend they could handle it without me, but they couldn't, not without me. Gregory had made his choice, and now there was no fixing it. It didn't take long for the walls to start closing in on Gregory. The boardroom meetings had become less about discussing the future of Silverstone and more about how to publicly sever ties with him without completely imploding. Every day, more headlines. More blame shifted onto his shoulders. I could imagine the tension in that room, Gregory at the head of the table, sweat on his brow, trying to convince people to stay loyal. But loyalty had a price, and it was clear the board had reached its breaking point. They'd tried to keep him in power, tried to spin this into something they could recover from. But the weight of the company's collapse was too much for anyone to ignore. The stock price was a joke, the investors were walking away, and the press was relentless. Silverstone was beyond saving, and the only question left was how much damage Gregory could do before they finally cut him loose. The board made it clear, Gregory had to go, but not yet, not before the big public statement, not before he had a chance to pretend it was his idea to step down. The damage was done, but they still wanted to control the narrative. It was classic Gregory, always more concerned with appearances than substance. And in the end, it didn't matter. Everyone knew what was really happening behind the scenes. I kept seeing the updates. Another round of stock drops, another batch of investors pulling out. The entire company was spiraling out of control. But in the middle of all this chaos, I got an unexpected message. It was from a rival tech company. "Hi Ella, I'm Alex from Arcadia Technologies. We've been following your work, and we'd love to offer you a role as a senior cybersecurity advisor. We've seen the value you bring, and we believe you could lead our cybersecurity overhaul. Let us know if you're interested." At first, I thought it was some kind of joke. Arcadia Technologies had been making waves in the industry, growing fast. They had the resources, the talent, and the reputation. And here they were, offering me a chance to join their team. I stared at the message for a long time, my heart racing. I hadn't even considered the idea of jumping ship. I was still reeling from everything that had happened. But as I sat there, the enormity of Silverstone's collapse became clearer. It wasn't just a bad quarter. This wasn't a hiccup in the company's growth. This was the end. Gregory's mess had wrecked everything. A strange sense of pride washed over me, mixed with a quiet fury. I wasn't just a casualty in this disaster. I was more than that. I was a leader in my own right. I had the skills, the knowledge, and the experience to make a difference. And I wasn't going to let this situation define me. I wasn't going to be some footnote in Silverstone's failed history. I hit reply. I'm interested, I typed. Just like that, I was taking control of my future again. The media continued to swarm the boardroom, capturing every moment as Gregory scrambled to maintain some semblance of leadership. But in the middle of all this, the final nail in his coffin came crashing down. An email leak. Internal emails, ones that I had written years ago, were published for the world to see. The warnings I had sent, the detailed reports about security gaps, the red flags I had raised, ignored by Gregory and the board. They were all there, in black and white. It was the smoking gun, the piece of the puzzle that everyone had been waiting for. The media tore into him. Gregory Hunt ignored warnings from senior engineer about security risks. The articles practically wrote themselves. And now, it was obvious to everyone, Gregory hadn't just mishandled the company's crisis. He had created it. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of closure. For years, I had begged them to take the security seriously, to understand what was at stake. They didn't listen, and now the whole world could see why. My warnings had been right. I had been right. And as much as I wanted to feel bad for him, for the way things were falling apart for him, I couldn't. I was done. I was done being the invisible worker in the shadows, the one they turned to only when things went wrong. It was time for me to step into the light. Arcadia Technologies had reached out to me because they saw my value. And in that moment, I realized something. Maybe I wasn't the one who had failed. Maybe it had always been them. Stepping into my new role at Arcadia Technologies felt like a weight lifting off my chest. The past few months, hell, the past year, had been nothing but chaos. But here, in this new office, everything felt different. Calm, focused. I was no longer the one scrambling to patch broken systems. No longer stuck in a place where my expertise was ignored. Here, my skills were welcomed, valued. The relief of it hit me like a wave. I could breathe again. When I walked into the office, they didn't treat me like some replacement hire. They treated me like I was essential. I didn't have to prove myself. My reputation had already done that. I was immediately thrust into the deep end. The platform they were building had its own set of challenges, but it felt like a fresh start. I wasn't cleaning up someone else's mess anymore. I was shaping something new, something that would actually work. My first meeting wasn't about spinning a story or figuring out how to save face. It was about making critical decisions. We were diving straight into the future. I was asked to lead a full-scale cybersecurity overhaul, the kind of work I'd been begging Silverstone to pay attention to for years. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. Back at Silverstone, things were falling apart. Gregory had been officially removed from his position as CEO. It was surreal, knowing I had walked away from the wreckage just as the ship finally sank. The board had cut him loose, and now the company was unraveling under the weight of its decisions. I could almost feel the echoes of his failure reverberating through the press releases, the shareholder meetings. I thought about the years I had spent at Silverstone, the sacrifices I'd made, and how it all came to nothing. The late nights, the missed birthdays, the time I'd poured into a company that didn't even value me. And yet, I had built something. I had helped create the platform that was still the backbone of Silverstone's business, even as it collapsed. Walking away from it all was humbling. I had given so much to that place, and it had discarded me like I was nothing. But now, I wasn't stuck in the past anymore. I wasn't haunted by the feeling of being invisible or unappreciated. I was here. And here, my expertise meant something. As I sat in the conference room, surrounded by new colleagues who respected me, I realized something important. This wasn't just a fresh start for my career. It was a chance to build something strong, something real from the ground up. On my terms. Gregory Hunt's mistakes had cost Silverstone everything, but they had given me the chance to rebuild, to make something that would last. And this time, I wouldn't just be another cog in the machine. I would be the one making the decisions. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of what I was doing. I wasn't just fixing things anymore. I was building something that could change the game, something that would stand on its own, something that would last. And that was everything